This is your captain from the flight deck. My name is Rishabh Kapoor, a third generation pilot, and I'm going to take you on my journey today. So friends, this is what happens when you give a pilot a mic. He can just go on and on. This is what we do behind closed doors. This is how we talk from the cockpit. So very dangerous giving a pilot a mic. So friends, I come from an illustrious aviation family. Both my father and grandfather flew for the national carrier. In fact, my grandfather was also the chairman of the very airline that I fly in today, Air India, the national carrier. Every family has stories, and we grew up listening to the adventures and the heroism of my grandfather, who served the Second World War and in fact was shot down by the Japs. They declared him dead. But luckily for us and him, he survived enemy territory for 7 days, walked across those dense forests of Burma, and reached the Allied Forces camp from where he was brought back to the country. So that makes us proud. All his experiences and the sheer trajectory in life, in everything that he's done, are all awe-inspiring. Needless to say, at the age of 7, I was inspired, I was motivated, I wanted to be like him. In fact, in all the growing up years, I imagined myself in the stories that I've heard from him. So I just wanted to be like him, I wanted to make him proud. Unfortunately, my grandfather never got to hear any of my accolades. We lost him the year that I went for flying. So the man who inspired me the most didn't even get to see me in uniform, nor did he hear any of my stories. I grew up in a perfectly happy family. I thought I had great parents, I had the perfect family, I had the perfect life, until that came crashing down too. Unfortunately, my parents got separated at a very early age, and all hell broke loose. All my dreams shattered, or life as we knew it had now come to an end. So my mother, who was our Rock of Gibraltar and brought us up pretty much on our own for very many years, we moved to Bombay, my mother, my elder brother and I, to my maternal grandparents' house. And in the absence of a father or a father figure, you tend to grow up faster. You tend to become more mature, you learn to take responsibilities. We roughened up. Both my brother and I, we roughened up both physically and mentally, and we became independent pretty fast. Thereon we moved to Pune for education, some of my finest years. I made the bestest of friends in school and college in Pune, met the love of my life, Kirti, and we were just having a blast. We were doing everything that a teenager does or is expected to do at that point in time. So much so that we were losing track of what we wanted to do. Like most teenagers actually at that point in time. And if there are kids in this audience, I'm sure they understand what I'm saying. So we were basically having a great time. Till I realized that there is something I need to do in my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But what I did know, that is that I wanted to be different. I wanted to do something where I stand out. And I also wanted to do something that would make my grandfather proud and the people around me proud. So even though we lost contact with my father for a couple of years, my father was back in our lives. He started guiding me and he started motivating me into becoming a pilot. And I used to look up to him too. So I took his advice. I went to the United States to study. And the rest is history. As Leonardo said, once you've tasted flight, you'll forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward. And that's exactly what happened with me 20 years back until this day today as a commercial pilot. So I'm sure you're wondering, what's the big deal? It seems like a simple enough job to do. Taking passengers from one place to the other, coming back home, and of course these days we've got the autopilot. But mind you, the autopilot doesn't do all of it. The pilot has to. But friends, a lot has happened in my career as a commercial pilot. I have been the General Secretary of the Pilots Union. I've been suspended. I've been terminated, I've been reinstated, I've been threatened. I have also had an attempt on my life. I have received anonymous mails tarnishing my image, but that's not why we're here. We're not to talk about that, we keep that for another day. I am here to talk about an evacuation. Evacuation from a bombed runway, bringing Indians back from war-torn Yemen, taking a selfie with a rebel, getting felicitated by the Ministry of Civil Aviation and getting appreciated by late Sushma Swaraj ji Ministry of External Affairs, for Operation Rahat, India's most complex and dangerous mission in bringing back Indians from war-torn Yemen, in the words of the former chairman and managing director, Mr. Rohit Nandan himself. Just like we were appreciated by the Ministry of Civil Aviation for repatriating Indians during the COVID crisis. So friends, I'm here to talk about Operation Rahat. In 2015, I was at a friend's dinner on her birthday when I got a call from one of my directors asking for help. He wanted me to volunteer for a flight to go to Yemen. I had no idea what was happening in Yemen at that point in time. So I did a quick Google search, because Google Baba knows it all these days, and I found out that Yemen, from being one of the prettiest places in the world, was today in one of the top 5 most dangerous places in the world. The problem there was a race for supremacy. The Houthis and the Hadis, who were further backed by the Saudis, rather the Iran-backed Houthis and the Hadis were backed up by the Saudis, were racing for control of the land, control of Yemen. So the Indian government had sent an advisory way back in January or December in 2015 for the Indians to come back. But as in most cases, not everybody comes back, thinks that this is not going to happen to us. Hamare saath thodi na ye ho sakta hai. So a lot of Indians continued to live in Yemen. And the Indian government now had a ballpark figure of 5,000 people that had to be brought back. But the only condition that the Saudis had was that no Air Force plane would be allowed in the Yemeni airspace. They were not comfortable with any Air Force plane coming in. The Navy was allowed to bring Indians back from the borders, from the ports, and they did. They did a splendid job. But the Air Force was not allowed, which meant that now a commercial airline, Air India, had to go in the middle of a war zone and bring Indians back. In the middle of the war zone, because the place had now become very hostile, the people were not being able to reach the far out ports. So we now had to make a landing in the heart of Yemen, the capital Sana'a, surrounded by land, where the war had intensified. Of course, I said yes for the mission, much against my wife's wishes. But little did I know at that point in time that this would be way more challenging than I thought. And this mission would be the most complex mission of my life, or the most complex flight of my life, and it was. So friends, I still remember the date. On the 9th of April 2015, I took off from Bombay to Djibouti. Djibouti is on the eastern coast of Africa, also known as the Horn of Africa, was supposed to be our base for multiple evacuations. By the time I landed on the 9th of April, the Indian Navy and Air India had already evacuated about 5,000 Indians. So we just had to carry out one final evacuation flight and bring out 550 Indians. That didn't look like that big a task. It looked fairly simple actually. We just had to go in, board the Indians and get them back. But 550 Indians don't fit in on an airplane. So we had to bring in 3 airplanes that final day, for the final day of evacuation. And we took off almost in an Air Force formation, one after the other, where I had the general on board my airplane, the former Chief General V.K. Singh, the Indian ambassador and personnel of the ministry. While we were the 3rd airplane to take off, it was all very adrenaline pumping till we got to the Yemeni airspace. Because the Saudi government had clearly given us an indication that there would be a 3-hour truce, with an hour 15 minutes being the flying time going in and coming out. That left us with very little time to board the passengers and actually bring them back. So as soon as we entered the Yemeni airspace, we were shocked to see that there were fireworks going on the ground. The war was still on. There was no ceasefire. So while we are now flying into the Yemeni airspace, we've been directed to go out because the war is still on. There is no truce. So we're pushed into the water, and after about 15-20 minutes, the first 2 airplanes are given permission to land. We heaved a sigh of relief and said, thank God, now we're getting into land, because we're critical on fuel as well. There's no refueling happening there. We just have to go in and bring people back. But after the first 2 airplanes were given permission, my airplane, where we have all the important documents on board and the general and the ministry personnel, we were termed as an illegal airplane. Now that is the last thing that a commercial pilot wants to hear in his life, that you are an illegal airplane and you're in the wrong airspace. It now meant that they have the right to shoot us down. They could legally shoot us down because we are termed illegal in their airspace. So they shunned us back. They wanted us to go back to Djibouti, where we came from, in not giving us permission to land. So now we are moving back to Djibouti, but at a snail's pace. And when I told the general that this has happened, and he says, no, Captain, the mission would have failed. if we don't go in and land, even the other two airplanes may not get permission to take off again. So forget the 550 people. We would have actually put two more airplanes and the entire set of crew on board that airplane at risk. So I begged, I pleaded. My Arabic is not very good, neither was the English very good of the Yemeni ATC guys, the air traffic controller. So we were having a tough time communicating as it is. And they were not letting us in, they just wanted us to go back. So we were pleading, we were fighting, we were arguing, we were quarreling. And finally it came to a point where I think he just got fed up of us. He says, just come in and get out of here. So he gave us that permission after a good 7 minutes of struggle. We've now burnt into critical fuel as well. But it seemed like we've got a minor victory. It actually felt like we won a small war. And we were given permission to go in and land. And just when I thought that that would be the end of all our troubles, we were in Sana'a in a jiffy. We were flying at Mach 0.8, which is the fastest an Airbus 320 can fly. But that was still not the end of it, because we had to now land on the bombed runway. It was at an elevation of 7,000 feet, almost like Srinagar. You need special training for that. There was no instrument landing system, so we had to land in a primitive way, almost like a manual landing. And it had terrain all around, so we had to be careful while making that landing. So we went around it. We were now on a final approach with about 400 or 500 feet to make that landing. The runway is right in front of our eyes, and suddenly we hear the sound of a machine gun. Da, 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 da. It almost felt like we'd been shot down. My entire life flashed in front of my eyes. Luckily for us, it wasn't a machine gun, it was a flock of birds. So bad, but not that bad, because they'd already splashed my windscreen bloodshot red. There was blood all over the windscreen. We now had a restricted view, and in any ideal condition on any normal flight, we'd just go around, circle and come back and land. But we were already so critical on fuel. So we had to make those final, critical, immediate decisions. And we did. We had to make that landing or we would have to go back, but we did. We made that landing. After landing on a bombed runway, imagine almost like craters on the runway. That's how the runway was. We've now vacated the runway and we have a welcome committee in the form of an anti-aircraft machine gun. So the gentleman on the jeep with an anti-aircraft machine gun pointed towards us only had to press the trigger. But he was only escorting us to park us to our bay. So these are scary moments. This is not something we're used to either. So he directed us on where we should park. While we were parking, the other two airplanes were getting ready for takeoff. I remember jumping out of the airplane as soon as I landed with my entire crew, including the General Saab himself. We were helping the passengers throw their bags so that we can quickly get out of Yemen, because there was no way we were going to finish this evacuation in 3 hours. We also had to do a quick external check to make sure that there was no substantial damage to the airplane. The birds could have had a cascading effect on the aircraft. We wanted to make sure that the engines are safe, the fuselage is safe, that it's not been damaged, there are no holes there, or the windscreen itself. So luckily there was no damage, there were no holes in the airplane, it was just a splash of blood that had to be cleaned, or we would be spending the night in Sana'a that day. So we got ready, we were airborne, and once we were out of the Yemeni airspace, we heaved a sigh of relief, and there were cheers in the cabin, because everybody knew, and I made that announcement, that we're now out of the Yemeni airspace and well and truly on our way back to Djibouti. Once we landed in Djibouti, the mission was a success, of course. We were all celebrating the success because the mission had now come to an end, the final evacuation, last flight has landed, and every single Indian that wanted to come back has now landed in Djibouti. And it wasn't just the Indians. It was the Americans, Britishers, Canadian, German, French, Russian. We brought back people, civilians of 41 countries. So it was a proud feeling when they came up to us and thanked us the traditional Indian way with folded hands. And it felt great that we as a commercial carrier went and brought back not just Indians but civilians of the world where no other airline dared to go. We as the national carrier went there and brought them all back. In the end, I just want to say it's been a fulfilling experience because I got the opportunity to serve my country, something that I've always wanted to do. Not that I wasn't scared. We're not that brave as people. We're not from the armed forces. We're just regular civilians. We're not from the Air Force, the Army, or the Navy. We've got no official training. But yet, somehow I managed to overcome my fear, because there is no scope of fear in commercial flying. We need to make split-second decisions. there is no undo button, and you don't get second chances. So I had the support of my family, the love of my family, and I hope wherever my grandfather is, I hope he's watching over me and he's proud of the man that I've become in carrying his legacy forward. So no matter what the challenge, it's about mind over matter and how each one of us can make a difference. Thank you.